first concept we want to keep in mind when we're making our maps is the idea of the visual hierarchy. And so the visual hierarchy is really how we're going to implement the way that we're conceiving of our data into the visual prominence of our map. So before we make the map and we're starting to work through our data, do some of our analysis, really think about, what am I trying to show here? What's the most prominent data within this map project? What's the secondary data, or the data that supports or provides more quantitative context to the prominent data? What's the geographic context, right? We're gonna have that be even more subtle and more below the primary data. And then what sort of background or map page elements can I put in there to provide a greater understanding? So if we think about visualization from our reading, right? We have our prominent map symbols on the top. That will be our data, right? How are we going to visualize that data? Below that, we're going to have our geographic context. And then below that, we're going to have our map elements. And then, at the very base level, you talk about base maps. We'll talk about base maps later in the semester. So really think about like the hierarchy being prominent data on top, secondary data, geographic context, map elements as your fourth layer. And if we look at a National Geographic map, which I think does a really good job of demonstrating these types of visual hierarchies, what's our prominent data in this map? Right, it's about natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes in Haiti. And so our prominent data is these proportional symbols of earthquake magnitude and these paths of different tropical storms and hurricanes. Right, so that is our prominent data, which has the highest visual salience in the map due to its kind of dissecting the map with the tropical storms and then the size of the proportional symbols. Our secondary data is really the impact of those natural disasters, which is felt by the population distribution. So in this case, we use a dot density map. That dot density map shows, 1 dot equals 1,000 people of population. So from that, we can see over here in the capital that there's a higher concentration of population, which provides context to the data or the impacts of those natural disasters. Our third layer is going to be our geographic context. That's really just going to be, these points, labels, the thin kind of boundary of the country, adjoining country here, and even lighter. So really we're trying to say, if we have our main data visualization in these kind of more saturated colors, purple, blue, then we have our population with these other color visualizations using a dot density. Then let's put that on top of a pretty subtle, pretty muted canvas so that these elements can really stand out. And then our fourth element, or fourth layer of that visual hierarchy, will really be all that background and auxiliary information, right? That's going to be our title, our locator map, our legend, data sources, institution, all that kind of like page elemental stuff that frames the map and provides you more information about how these phenomena that you're mapping are presenting themselves, or what the pattern is, or what the spatial structure is. This all provides contextual information about that and gives the map reader the information that they need so they can really understand what the prominent data is trying to show. So visual hierarchy, really think about in your mind when you're making a map, like what is the point of this map? What am I trying to show? And then from that, how can I tier or structure or kind of rank the visual design components of that to match how I'm conceptualizing that process that I'm mapping?